Welcome to another exciting week here on Psychthoughts. If you're just joining us for the first time, you have no idea what you've gotten into. And if you're coming back again, you probably make poor choices. I'm Derek, and with me as always is my best friend and colleague. His name is
Doug. I'm here broadcasting live from my hidden base. So, it's kind of weird. I just realized that you on the video do the intro, and on the radio, I do the intro. Because I always go, good afternoon, tech. But it don't work here because it's kind of like, good whatever time you're watching this, or wee hours or midnight. But it's nice.
Well, I've got nothing to do when on the YouTube. I don't have any sliders to move or any music to cue. It's pretty easy.
Just gotta sit there. So. Yeah. The only thing I know that probably bothers you the most, but I can't see your hands, is you don't have anything to fiddle with. Because, on the radio, you always fiddle with doing something with the mic or take it apart.
Yeah.
Or checking emails or seeing if somebody's calling us, making sure the phone works.
No. Now, I have to give Derek credit about that. That takes 40 minutes to get everything logged on so that we can see we've got no email.
Yeah, it takes a long time to realize you've got no email. Speaking of email, if you would like to send us a message, you can always do that at psychthoughts@tntech.edu, psychthoughts@tentech.edu. I haven't checked it in a while. Let's pull up and see what we've got. My bet, Doug, is that we have nothing.
Well, ever since we, distance ourselves from elite singles, we don't get emails anymore.
I will give that to elite singles. We got a lot of emails.
We did. So,
which was always good.
That was always good. I doubt if we got any emails. So
no.
No, you kept saying that, bro. I'm gonna start using it for alternatives, so at least we get something. So
don't forget, if you like what we do on the show, to hit the share button and subscribe to our channel. We're pretty low key, but we like to talk about things that mean a little bit to us. Doug and I have somehow recruited a poor soul into being our intern, who's decided, even though she's done with her degree, she's going to continue to be an intern, mostly because we can't pay her, and that'll be great. And her name is Elaine. How you doing, Elaine?
Good. How are you?
Vertical. Got nothing catchy today, huh? You're just
Nope. Every time I think of something really good, I forget. I do. You guys get to talking and I totally forget, and it's just like, whatever.
We have that effect on people. Turns out after an entire semester worth of classes, my students can't understand what I wanted on the test. So we tend to do that to people. Today we're going to talk about something that you may be experiencing recently. And we know that what happens in our culture is we have this, what I like to call social media culture, where you either are all the way on one side or all the way on the other. So a forced dichotomy. People are very opinionated. And with all that's going on with COVID-19 and the restrictions, maybe you're in a state that's got even more restrictions than others, you may be struggling with holding on to a bit of a grudge. Now, I know that's hard to believe, but you might be angry at someone right now. Doug, have you ever been angry at anybody?
I have a list of scorn. You know that. I have like 4 people on a list of scorn. And you know who you are.
This might be the first time you're learning if you're on Doug's list of scorn.
It's a short list.
This list of scorn was brought to you by our partners in Res Life.
We're like Res Life, the radio show on YouTube.
We're going to talk about some tips and tricks and some proven theory about how you can put hurt behind you and so that you can move forward. As always, we like to use articles from magazines that are relevant to our field. This one also from this week, like last week, comes to us from Psychology Today. Great publication, and we'll just kind of dissect it a little bit. Again, moving past this hurt so that you can actually function. Doug, when you were in clinical practice, how many people did you see who really could benefit from what we're going to talk about today?
quite a few. There's always, I mean, it's literally the truth. I mean, that's a big, huge stumbling block to a healthy development, is just staying focused on something in your past, not letting it go. Just, it's like, I'm going to bury it. Now let's dig it back up and look at it again. I mean, it's just constantly reliving the same thing. So
Yeah, we get kind of a skewed view of what this means. I mean, I grew up hearing we have to learn to forgive and forget. From what I've understood and from what I know, that's impossible. We can't forget what's happened to us. And that's a convenient part of being human, right? So
yeah.
I think we get caught up in that forgive and forget. And because we can't forget, we really just give up on the forgive side of things as well. I when I work with kids, which is pretty rarely because I'm intimidating to kids or something like that, I don't know. They'll love to talk to me about how awful their parents are. And I think if we're honest, at some point in our development, throughout our social emotional development, we have thought our parents were either morons or evil. Please don't let me say that what you've experienced, if you're out there and you experienced true abuse, please don't let me minimize that right now. But it is pretty typical for most of us to displace blame. Elaine, have you ever displaced blame on someone?
I think relationship wise, yeah, it's been a problem for most people. I've had that problem, and a lot of my problem does stem from parental relationships, and so that's created problems for me, not just in relationships, but also relationships with my kids.
Absolutely. So we can only blame people for so long before we have to start to take some responsibility for our actions. If you're listening right now and you're that 30-year alcoholic because you didn't have the greatest parents, at some point you're going to have to take responsibility for your actions so that you can start to live a better life. Often what happens is we hold on to our hurts and our injustices even after that person has either forgot or they're dead. And at that point, what good can we do? So pretty sure you're going to find what we're going to talk about today difficult, especially if you have a list of scorn. You might find this difficult to do. You also might be in Doug's fan club or on the list. I don't know how to.
The list. There's only 4.
If he ever looks at you and just says 5, that's probably not good.
Now y'all know me. Do you know how much you would have to do to get on my list of scorn? That would be
quite a bit.
Quite a bit. So
I'll get us kicked off here. We're going to talk to you about 5 techniques, 5 steps in this process of moving forward. Again, give credit where credit is due. This is just our summary of an article from Psychology Today. So number 1, getting past yesterday demands both thinking and doing. What do you make of that?
I think it's pretty self-explanatory. It just takes an effort though to really, you have to stop and think and not just go with what you know. And you have to say, this isn't how I should be behaving. This is a bad behavior. This is a repeat behavior. And, at least like you said, taking responsibility for it, it's stopping your part of that action.
Absolutely. So this is not a passive process. You're not just going to forgive someone just by sleeping, by avoiding them, by not doing anything. So this first step, I think, is meant to say, if you're serious about wanting to move on and have a better you, then you're going to have to do something about that. For me, I kind of think about going to the gym. It's fun to think about going to the gym. When I lose all the weight, I'll be incredible. But if I don't go and I don't work up a sweat, I'm probably not going to lose any weight, right? So if I'm not actively pursuing forgiveness, if I'm not trying to work on this element of my life, it's not going to magically get better. So step 1, you're going to have to do some work.
Well, that's kind of universal for anything when we talk about it in the counseling field or any other. You're going to have to do something. It's not going to come easy. You're going to have to think on it, or you're just going to have to put actions to words. So,
well, because what's the average age range that y'all work with when you're in a clinical setting? Is it adult?
Well, now when I did it, I always liked kids, and so I specialize in kids. I don't really. That's kind of a hard question to put down, I guess, because you see all types and all ages. For people that seek to seek out counseling and anything.
Well, I guess my point was that if you're working with somebody that's 25, 30 years old, you've got 25 to 30 years sometimes of this behavior that you have to overcome. That's why it's so hard for them to relearn how to behave or be able to actually work towards it instead of, like I said before, just going on with what they normally do.
We have the stages of change, and that first stage of change is called pre-contemplative stage of change. They're not often even aware that they've got something they need to work on. So they can't even contemplate making a change. And just up from that is contemplative, right? So I've moved from no awareness to now I know that there's an area that I need to grow. Or I had a professor in my doc program who talked about having mental muscles, right? And he would say, in the pre-contemplative stage, you don't even know how weak you are. And in the contemplative stage of change, you're thinking to yourself, I'd really like to lift those weights, but you still don't have the muscle to do it, right? So yeah, I think that pre-contemplative stage, the longer that you stay in that pattern, maybe the more consequences you have from that pattern.
Yeah, that's true.
And to answer your question, Elaine, I work primarily with adults. So I do trauma work, which I had this idea that trauma work for me was going to be just working with firefighter EMT personnel, because that's my background as a firefighter EMT for 10 years before fully transitioning to something else. I really thought that's who I was going to work with. But when you start working with trauma, you start working with all types of trauma, not just post-traumatic stress from emergency response. Now, kids can be traumatized, absolutely. My problem with kids is that I love them and I kind of want to steal them a little bit. So I look at my colleagues who work with like 5-year-olds, and I don't know how they do it. It would just be like a trail of murdered parents if I were doing, because I don't do well with that. I want you old enough where you can actually make an impact on your life, so that when you have this shift from pre-contemplative, contemplative to action, that you can actually start making those changes yourself. And that's just an area that I've focused on. Doug, I've seen him work with kids. He's amazing.
I want to point something out to this, because a lot of people who watch this are probably psych majors and different things, and I think that it's mentioned but not a lot. And I'm just going to mention it. It's just a side topic, but what Derrick said, as a counselor, you go into this idea that I'm going to be able to work with everybody, I want to help everybody, but you're not. And it's important that you know what your limitations are and what you feel that you excel in. I have clientele that I can do counseling with pretty much everybody, but there's one certain population that I have a hard time doing counseling with. And I acknowledge that to myself. And I think that makes me a better therapist, because if somebody came to me and said, these are my problems, and that was one of them, I could go, well, look, I don't think I could really help you, but I know somebody who would. And I think that a lot of times when we go into the counseling field, we think, okay, I've got to, do all this, but you got to remember the main point of being a therapist is that we're trying to bring you the best help. Okay. And so if I was like a general practitioner and you came to me and said, hey, my foot's acting weird, and I'd go, well, I kind of could fiddle around with it, but if I could send you to someone who specializes in it and expedite your healing, that's the ideal. And also, when I teach intro, when we talk about therapy, I tell students too, I said, if you go see a counselor and you're sitting there and you're like, I don't like Doug, I just can't connect him, tell them, I'm not there to win like your friendship or personality contest. I'm there to gain your trust so I can work with you. And so if you told me I would feel better if I met with a guy that had a beard, I'd go, I know the man. So, and that's just completely off the point, but you know.
So I love that you say that. That's very controversial. You know, in our state, we went through a big national kind of moment of spotlight, which would enable clinicians to kind of choose who they worked with. And this got turned into a number of different things. And if you're not familiar with it, that's fine also. But our recognition of our ability to work better with certain populations is a vital part of us being a professional helper, right?
Right.
And, you know, I'd like you to really evaluate yourself if you're out there watching. Right now, if what I'm saying is causing you to want to turn the YouTube channel to something else, could you really work with people who think like I do? Or would you be better served sending them to someone who can help them? We see this every 4 years in the political cycle, right? If the thought of talking to a Republican makes you want to gag, you probably can't be a counselor to them, okay? The same is true the other way. If the thought of talking to a Democrat makes you want to gag, you probably aren't going to be the best help to them. Now, you need to work on that. As a clinician, that's something that we have to work on, understanding that people are a culmination of choices, that people are not just defined by how they vote or what they drive or their occupation, but that in general, I think what Carl Rogers would say, people are people. And that's a phenomenal trait for them to have, because they are free to make mistakes and they're free to have wrong ideas. And we don't have to take them so personal. Go to your favorite, you know, if you're on social media, and I don't know what platform this would work on, but
Instagram.
Go to the Insta chat and find someone who has a belief, and then watch all the people who like are offended that they have that belief. That's something we have to work on as a culture. And I think this lesson is really going to talk a lot about that.
The thing that bothers me the most about it is that when you say, well, I can't work with a certain population, they instantly go, well, you're prejudiced or you're discriminating. And I'm like, no, I know what my limitations are. You know, I could come over your house and do plumbing. Will it be great? Probably not, you know, so you know, it's kind of like, you know, you can go to a doctor, or do you want to go to one that's specialized in your problem, you know? And I think that's where we get confused, because when somebody goes, well, you know, I can't think that I can do that. Now, I had an incident when I was in grad school. We had to do these little mock counseling sessions, and this counselor was confronted to do a session, and they told him what the problem was. And they said, well, I can't work with this group. And it was a very prejudiced feeling they had. It wasn't because, oh, well, I don't feel like I'm capable. You know, I can see if I work with someone that if I didn't believe that way, I could put that aside unconditionally and work with them. But there's just certain things that I know, like you said, with kids, you have that much more of attachment to them. And you're like, you can't, that kind of skews your vision and also your treatment plan, you know, because you're like, oh, well, let me, you know, oh, and they're bad. No, you can't do that, you know, right. You can't. So, but I think a lot of times we kind of forget that. And I think that being able to know your own limitations and being able to do that makes you much more effective as you know, a therapist. So
let's move on to the second point, Doug. Well said.
Let that go. Just let it go. Now I've lost my thingamajigma. I know it's reevaluate. Let me see here. It says reevaluate. Reevaluate your experiences and discard, but anything that's mistaken beliefs.
Yeah.
Often about what makes you happy. Sometimes the hate really makes me happy. That list of scorn makes me happy.
You know, our memories are what we call a gist memory. We get the gist of things, but our memories are full of false information, of things we didn't record quite right. And Doug loves to talk about the power of venting, but not in the power that venting helps you, right?
I love when we talk about that in class. I do. It's like, oh, you ever mad at somebody? Yes, and the class is really behind. I go, then you go, let me vent. And then I go on about it. And then I go, do you know what it does? Does nothing. It's just, it just helps you to rehearse your anger. And they're like, no, it does make me feel I'm like, ah.
Well, and the question
it has
is,
potential. It has potential to make you feel better. Go ahead, Elaine.
now the memories that you're talking about, those are biased though, because they're from our point of view and how we're feeling about the moment and the person and everything else. So while we think they're correct, because I know I'm always right, but it's from our perspective, it's our biases in that memory. So we remember it a certain way and it may not have even been close.
So any of my students would know that my favorite movie is the movie Inside Out, an animated movie. And there's a scene where they're on the thought train, the train of thought, and they're trying to get back to headquarters, and they spill these two boxes. One's facts and one's opinions. And Joy says, I don't know where they go. And Bing Bong says, oh, people get those confused and just put them anywhere. And I think what I like about that, and when we apply that to what Doug's talking about in this power of venting, our memories are plastic, right? So when we pull a long-term memory out of storage, we have to then reconsolidate that memory that evening. So every time we look at a memory, and we might embellish the story. Maybe I'm talking to Doug about my wife, right? And I'm really wanting him to be on my side. So I'm going to embellish a little bit about what can you believe that she said kind of stuff, Well, when I sleep that night and I reconsolidate that memory, unfortunately, what's going to happen is that becomes the new fact. That becomes my new memory. And I can start to reinforce this cycle over and over and over again. Eventually, you'll be in a counselor's office and you'll say ridiculous things like, she always, and then you'll name something. And any counselor worth their weight in sand even would say, always is a bit of an absolute. And they would want to challenge that. Kind of another point, if your therapist doesn't challenge your absolutes, you need a new therapist. Always you need a new therapist.
Well, I mean, it's kind of funny when we're talking about this letting go, it kind of feeds into critical thinking skills. And Elaine's right. You have to acknowledge that everybody has bias, and the way we look at things, we're always going to kind of paint it, well, I was the victim, Derrick, and things like that. And I've been told that too, when we talk about memories, the more you recall a memory, the more you will distort it. The more it changes, so by the time you think back to your 5th birthday and I go, well, my 5th birthday was great. There was a plane, there was dogs, there was a horse. It was all wonderful. And my parents were like, no, they weren't. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember it just like it was yesterday.
So, we can have what's called an attribution error, where something that happened to a sibling, you actually believe it happened to you. I remember very distinctly on one of my birthdays getting a voice modulator that made my voice sound like Optimus Prime.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
It would have been awesome. The problem is that I never received that toy, that was my brother. And the age I would have had to have been to get an Optimus Prime toy, you shouldn't have let me put something in my mouth, right? I mean, that would have been terrible. But I have that memory just clear as day. I can, to this day, tell you where I was sitting when I was present in the studio audience as they filmed the last episode of a show called Taxi, which was a great show. I love that show on Nick at Night, right? The problem with that is that show ended and that finale was recorded over a decade before I was born.
I was wondering, I didn't think you were that old.
Yeah. I can
you know what that means, don't you?
I was reincarnated. I thought that's where you were going with that.
Obviously, your other life, you were at the studio watching the final episode, which would have been really cool. Good for you.
Yeah, so our memories, right? If we start really holding on to our list of scorn and we don't evaluate what really happened, I think sometimes we eliminate a lot of fact and substitute a lot of opinion. Or Elaine, the way you put it, I think was beautiful. This bias that we're introducing into this memory. Remember, our memories are constructed. They are not foolproof. Most people believe they're correct when recalling an event. Yet, if you've ever been in type of dilemma, you know there's two or three truths to an argument: your side, my side, and the right side. All three seem pretty accurate. Number three, open your heart and mind. Okay, so it says a great deal of the resistance comes from nothing more pedestrian than the great human reluctance to change. I'll often ask people in my counseling room a pretty basic question. I'll say, how does it benefit you to keep this behavior that you're wanting to change? And they tend not to like it. You know, you ask the drug addict, how does it benefit you to be a drug addict? They're probably going to say it doesn't. But Doug and I can both tell you from our knowledge of behavioral psychology, if it didn't benefit them, they wouldn't do it. This is a behavior that's been reinforced over and over again. And we as people tend not to like change. So even changing for the good, getting up earlier, going on a run, having one less drink on Saturday, all of those things we tend to resist.
Yeah, sure do.
It's great insight there, Doug. Thank you for that.
Well, you know, what can I say?
Mm-hmm.
Everything will be all right. It'll work out in the end.
As long as we do nothing, it'll be just fine.
That's right. I know that I'll make the big turnaround.
There you go.
So, wait a minute. Isn't that the next one? Stop magical thinking. I tell you, and I have to say this, and this is so evil, and I tell my class this, is that we as humans love that magical thinking. I mean, it's kind of like, I'm going to go on a diet, I'm going to lose 10 pounds in 2 days. No, you're not. I mean, you didn't gain 10 pounds in 2 days. You're not going to lose it in 2 days. And then I go, I love it when students come to me and they go, okay, looky here. I made a 40 on the midterm. What do I need to make on the final to get an A? And I'm like, a miracle? And they go, well, what if I get 100? And I will sometimes go, you get 100, I'll give you an A. They don't, because I know there's no way. You know, you can't, you know, you're not going to put yourself in that. You just have that magical thinking that I'll just sleep with the book and it'll ooze into my brain. You know, you got to stop magical thinking. I mean,
that pattern that you're talking about, Doug, I think is the highlight of magical thinking. It's not the fact that I didn't come to class. It's certainly not the fact that I didn't study. I just know that I can do all of those things overnight. I mean, never mind, I'm on academic probation. Never mind, I just came off academic suspension. I'll just get it together. I'll get it together on Tuesday.
Jump in for the big win.
Jump in for the big win. And then often they jump in, but it's not the big win, right?
Well, now, would you say that people that do that too are more inclined to, when they hit that point and they see that, you know, D or F on their report card, even though, you know, they tried so hard, do those type of people tend to take responsibility for it or not take responsibility for it?
For me, I've seen about half and half. What about you, Doug?
I think it's half and half. I think that you can just start talking about attributes, because some people, when they see the D, most of the time they're not going to go, well, I made that myself because I didn't apply myself. Now, there are a few people who will go, it'll strike them as, this is a wake-up call. I need to change the way I'm studying. I need to do all these other things. When other people will, you know, take bad things and put them on situations. Well, Doug didn't like me. The class was too big. My neighbor's dog barked all the time. I couldn't study. You know, we do one or the other. So I'd say it is about 50% of the time.
Don't forget the 2020 special, Doug. Coronavirus.
coronavirus. I couldn't do anything. This virus is,
Yeah.
and now I am not going to do good this fall because I do believe there's murder hornets living outside my door.
Absolutely.
So I cannot come to class.
There's murder hornets swarming the beaches next to the dragonfish, and we are all goners. I've shared this story plenty of times, Elaine. You just haven't heard it. I was that student who needed that wake-up call. Doug and I actually eat with the professor at Tennessee Tech who gave me my wake-up call. She did it in a way that was very compassionate but very stern, and it, kind of the summary of her statement was, you can either do it or not, just don't make excuses. And that really changed my academic trajectory, and I have been able to tell her that in my professional life, that in a lot of ways, though I didn't finish my major in what she was she is a teacher, I did learn an appreciation for learning, right? And realize that GPA is about the dumbest thing in history, right? But learning is pretty awesome. The experience of college is amazing, right? If I'm so focused on getting every question right, as a perfectionist, what I do is I then get them all wrong so that I can blame other people, right? There's a great book about procrastination, and it talks about perfectionists being procrastinators. And anybody who knows me knows that I'm a bit of a procrastinator.
That's a good book. I've kind of started it a couple of times. I want to finish it one of these days.
That's the thing I think is really great about college, no matter when you go, is the fact that sometime in that first year or two, I think most students do come to the realization at some point, either, I was great in high school and I come to college and it didn't quite work out the way I wanted to, or maybe I've just been kind of putting partial effort in, or maybe this isn't something I want to do, or maybe this is something I really want to do. I think the first 2 years in college really help students one way or another, especially in the self-realization of where they're going.
It's dangerous to take responsibility, and it's dangerous to have a new perspective. It is our culture is getting easier and easier to have that 4.0, and just what I need you to hear, if that's you out there, look, I'm not going to shame you for having a good GPA, but what I am going to say is, if that's your sense of humanness, if that's where your sense of worth comes from, study after study after study shows that it's not going to work out well for you when you go to the workforce, right? Or in your marriages where there is no GPA, right? It's a difficult thing. It's either pass, fail, or complicated.
That's it, complicated.
This last one is an interesting one. It's about disconnection. And I can't hear about disconnection without thinking of the AA model, right? You have to change your playmates and change your playgrounds. Very vital part of anyone struggling with an addiction, right? If you are that person and you think, well, I had a problem with drinking, but it's okay that I hang out with all of my drinking buddies still. I mean, you're just fooling yourself, right? I tell people all the time, Cheers is a really fun TV show that's not based in reality. Sam can't own a bar as an alcoholic. It doesn't work, right? I think I might have even said that last week. That's how frequently I say it. That being said, if you're surrounded by negative people, so what Bandura talked about, reciprocal determinism, people who are always mad, always upset, always ticked off at somebody, well, you're probably going to be always mad, upset, and ticked off at people. If you've had a job anywhere, you've known that person who, when they go on vacation, the office, the dock, the cooler, wherever you work is so much better. And the moment they come back, you suddenly start realizing how awful corporate is and how your boss hates you. And it's a terrible experience. I think Doug and I, we've talked about it on our own, but we come from a place in our profession where we weren't always university educators, right? We worked what Doug and I like to call real jobs, where there was like a time card and you had to clock in, and your boss had a boss, had a boss, had a boss, and they all had a different idea about what you needed to be doing that day. It is a rough existence if you can't learn to disconnect from those who are sucking the life out of you.
Well,
I agree. We're less than a minute though.
There you go, Elaine.
We ain't got enough time left, and I was going to end the show with me singing "Let It Go."
Let it go.
You know, so that's just the way it ends, you know.
Don't forget to like our show. You can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Psychthoughts. You can find us on the Instagram. We're like Psychthoughts something or another.
2020.
You can find us on Twitter. We're Psychthoughts R1. And then you found us on YouTube, Psychthoughts Radio. I'm Derek. I'm with Doug and Elaine. We do the show because we like it. If you don't, that's your problem.